So one of the things that Tucker said in the video was that Christians are not supposed to hurt other people because it's literally what the text says.
I have a lot of problem with force. I'm a Christian. I mean, I'm a believer in a religion that rejects force, actually, rejects hurting other people, that calls for you to pray for your enemies. Because literally their religion says you're not allowed to go hurt people. Let's import a bunch of those. Because they're clearly the least threatening, the most productive citizens you could possibly.
And while I'll agree that generally most Christians are good people, you cannot really not notice the bloody history of Christianity, and it comes from the Bible. Because if you do read the Bible, which I don't think Tucker does, to be honest, because if he did, he would see the chapters of genocide, killing babies. Christians believe Old Testament was revealed by God, so is their God, and he's commanding genocide. So there's multiple passages in the Bible which talk about this, and it was used a lot when Christians were doing crusades and when they were doing like offensive jihad, let's say, because back in the time of the crusades they would just go around and said the Pope declared every non-Christian is okay to die.
The main issue with the speech is when Tucker says that all the 5 English-speaking countries, which is the US, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, I don't know which one, the UK probably, have been built by Christians, and that's why they are the best and they have the best human rights and everything like that. Well,
this country was built originally by Christians. All those 5 countries were. That's why they're great countries. That's why they have human rights. Because respecting the rights of other people is a Christian precept. It doesn't exist in non-Christian countries. I'm sorry, it doesn't. Christians are unique in that they believe that each person was created by God, and therefore his rights, the right to say what you really think, the freedom of speech, the right to practice any religion you want, the right not to be a slave, those are endowed by God, not government. But just as a political matter, what they don't like about Christians is Christians recognize that those rights are inherent, they're bestowed by God, not people, and they can't be taken away. That's why Christians led the abolitionist movement. We don't have slavery because of Christians. And in non-Christian countries, there still is slavery. It's really simple. The only reason we recognize that any of these human rights that we're supposedly defending are rights at all is because of Christianity. It's the only reason. That's the only reason. Who do you think defined those as human rights? Christians. Because they were Christians. So if you hate Christians, you're making me a little nervous.
I mean, you just have to kind of think for a few seconds to realize that's a load of bull, because just how did America start? You've killed all the natives and you did transatlantic slave trade. So none of those things has any resemblance of human rights. And maybe you can say, well, that's not really part of Christianity. Well, okay, well, don't claim then the country is founded by Christians. Because if you say Christians founded the US, Christians founded the UK, well, also then the slavery was part of the US, right? So it was part of the Christians. Yeah, right. So you can't pick and choose. If you're gonna claim that Christianity is behind all the success of the West, you have to take the bad with the good. Same way, if we see what happened in Europe in the Second World War, we don't say this is a Christian world war. No, because we recognize there's something like nationalism, there's something like secularism, and these countries by the 20th century, they have been completely secularized. And the religion itself wasn't the main guiding character, and there was other ideologies and philosophies behind these atrocities. Then Tucker says that respecting other people's rights is a Christian concept, and this is obviously a lie, because respecting other people's rights was recognized in a caliphate as well, and in other systems. You just have different level of, let's say, status within the society. Non-Christians in Christian countries back in the days were treated pretty horribly, and they were forcibly converted. Just where I am in Slovakia, there were forced conversions of Muslims to Christians. In Hungary, they destroyed every mosque possible to not even have some reminiscence of Islamic history. So this happened, and there was major murder and genocide to non-Christians in Christian countries, not to mention Jews. All the Jewish persecutions throughout thousands of years ago happened in Christian lands, not in Muslim lands, in Christian lands. And all those persecutions and Holocaust and all those things happened under Christian watch. So to claim that non-Christians have great time, I would say, yeah, maybe you live in some fairy tale, or you just don't know history. Then Tucker goes on and say that the human rights comes from Christianity. Well, obviously that's a lie. Human rights, who come up with this term? It comes from liberalism. It comes from the UK. It comes from John Locke. Maybe they have been Christians, but the idea of inherent human rights and this like modern human rights understanding is not a Christian idea at all. It does claim that human rights are from God, but what are these human rights? When you have the right to free speech, the right to assemble, the right to vote, does that sound Christian? There's no democracy in Christianity. It never existed, right? It wasn't in the Bible. There was slavery in the Bible, so Christianity, the right to not be a slave, is not a Christian idea. Jesus was okay with it, so that's not coming from Christianity. Just because Christians came up with the human rights concept doesn't mean they were not affected by liberalism, because liberalism back then was in full swing, and that is the basis of human rights. If you look at the meaning of human rights, like all these things have to do with democracy, freedom, and all those things, and individual freedom, which has no basis in Christianity. These things are not Christian based. These things are something else packaged by the Christians, but it's not Christianity. So the human rights that you claim to not forcibly convert people, you have a right to practice your faith, that is not a Christian idea. That is not a Christian idea. In Christianity, you have blasphemy laws. You had blasphemy laws. You had like capital punishment. So that's Christian idea, right? That's in the Bible. You can't argue with that. So, if you start saying no, it's we have these sort of laws coming from Christianity, and then you look at the source of Christianity, which is the Bible, or you look at the history of Christianity and you look at their main, I don't know, figures, or like the main, lawgivers and the law, it was never the case. So what's going on? Is Tucker just pretending to know Christianity? Or he very well knows this is not what Christianity teaches, but we have to hold on to something to combat the liberal mind. So we're gonna claim we're Christians even though I'm evangelical. I don't blah, 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 blah. He's not really what does he really believe? And the funny thing is, those people who gave you human rights and who gave you all these things that you claim are Christian, those were the apostates of Christianity usually, or those were the people of science that wanted Christianity gone because they recognized the stringent character of the church. So they wanted to break out from this prison, and that's why they promoted scientism and all these new concepts, liberalism, democracy, human rights, to replace the old biblical concepts. So it's funny because what Tucker is saying, those things that we consider like at such a high value, they are actually not Christian at all. These are murtads, like these are the ex-Christians coming up with these ideas who are just trying to replace the Bible to not go that direction anywhere because it was so corrupt, the church. There was a reason why the church and the state had to separate, because it was inconceivable to continue like that. The right not to be a slave is coming from Christianity, really? Really? The genocide of the entire South America was done by Christians, and it was done on the backs of Bible. So don't tell me, and the slave trade was also justified by Christianity. So don't tell me that this stuff is coming from Christianity as well. Come on, man. And another thing he says is that like Christians are now being attacked and blah blah blah, which is true. Christianity is being attacked, and it's being like attacked. It's been attacked for hundreds of years already, because the current Christians like Tucker, they are not real Christians. The real Christians in the past would like look at Tucker as like heretic. So the current Christians are like very like low value compared to the real Christians in the past. But even these like low value Christians are now a threat to the modern system, so they are going after them, of course, and for just basic stuff. But to claim that Christianity is the most hated group, Christians are really, people are going after us. Really? What about Muslims? Who's more hated? Come on, let's be honest. Is Islam ever
projected positively in media, presented positively in the media. I'm not talking about liberal media when they go and have some iftar in Ramadan, but in reality, if you watch the news, if you look at the reality of wars in the Middle East, if you look at like geopolitics, if you look at like if you just do a research among people and you ask them, what do you think about Islam and Muslims? Will most people have a positive view, or will most people be concerned and maybe even say that most Muslims are terrorists, which I thought as well? Is that coming from where does that come from? Because it didn't exist before, this like sort of like connection that Islam evil. It wasn't like that in the past. I think Muslims are pretty solid in the number one place in the world of being the most hated group of people, and Islam as a way of life.
Well, you can't worship false religions. First of all, the state shouldn't be imposing a religion on you. That is a religion, not so different from Rome. Worship our gods or we'll punish you. And the early Christians said, okay, I'll be punished then, because I'm not worshiping your gods. Happy to live next to you. I'm a tolerant person by my nature. Christians are tolerant by nature. They're not allowed to convert by force. They're not allowed to force you to believe anything, because God created you. We didn't. But the one thing I can't do, I'm not allowed to do, is worship false gods. But what I'm not going to do is worship them as gods, period, because I can't.
And the idea that Christians are tolerant by nature, I would say, yeah, the current modern Christians maybe are, but the Christians in the past were not tolerant at all. That's why they had blasphemy laws. That's why they had all these things, because they were not tolerant that much. And the tolerance began after the secularism, after the dissolution between Catholics and Protestants, and the separation of church and state and all that stuff. That's when the tolerance came in, because they have been replaced as the main ideology of the world, and now it's scientism or whatever, it's modernism. But when they were in power, when Christians were in power, they were not tolerant. They are tolerant now when they are like not at power at all. So yeah, you look at like who's really like tolerant when they're in power. And the last point, Carl Tucker says that he can't worship false gods. That's just something he's gonna cross. That's a line he's not gonna cross. Well, if you're not gonna worship false gods and you don't want to worship, the system, liberalism, trans people, whatever they throw at you, well then, okay, and you want to worship the real God, why don't you worship him by obeying him? Why don't you do that? Even in even your own understanding of Christianity, you're not obeying him. You're not doing what you're supposed to be doing according to the Bible. And then if you really care about obeying God and really following God and really like not worshiping idols, well then stop worshiping Jesus Christ, who's been made into an idol, when in reality Jesus Christ is one of the biggest prophets. He's a Messiah, he's coming back, but he's just a man and he's not God. And you worshiping him, you made him into the biggest idol ever with the crucifix and everything. And this is what made you weak, because you've basically created a false religion that's crumbling right now. So if you want to not worship false gods, you're doing it. But if you want to really worship the only God, you don't want to have any idols, and you don't want to have anything in between you and God, you should embrace Islam. You should learn about Islam and then embrace it, of course. Anyways, so I invite you to Islam. So I'm very firm in what I believe in. But that's just me. Like, do whatever you want. But this is just my feedback, because I like what he says sometimes. I like his perspective, but he's clearly wrong in suggesting like on this Christianity idea, this fantasizing of Christianity. It's like the only thing these right-wing people can do, because they have no other thing to do. There's nothing else there's no other idea to go back to. Like, what defines us as white Europeans? Nothing, pretty much. So really, this whole thing, just scratch it. Start from scratch. Is there a God? Yes. Is it just one? Yes. Does he have a son? No. He doesn't begin. He doesn't end. He's outside of this earth. He doesn't need us. We need him. If you believe that, which you do, then say La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, and stop worshipping false gods, man. All right, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.